Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of my Black Plague painting series. This time we're going to be painting the Abominatroll from the Zombie Bosses expansion pack. Now because I've already painted my Wolf Abomination grey, I'm going to be deviating slightly from the character art for this miniature. So instead of painting him grey, I'm instead going to paint him a shade of green, but I am going to start by priming him with Army Painter's Uniform Grey. The first thing I'm going to paint on this troll is his eyes using Citadel's Mephiston Red. For the main body of the troll, I'm going to be using Elysian Green. I've only watered down my paint a little bit, and for most of the miniature I was able to cover it with just one coat of paint. And at this part I'm not too concerned with neatness, I'm just trying to get all the flesh areas covered with the green. For the next part I'm going to be using Army Painter's Tan Flesh to paint the inside of the mouth. I wanted the tongue to stand out from the rest of the mouth, so I'm just going to be mixing in a bit of Dryad Bark with my Tan Flesh in about a 3-to-1 mix. I'm also going to be using the same color mix to paint a gum line all around the base of the teeth. I wanted my troll's teeth to have somewhat of a rotted look about them, so for this part I'm going to be mixing some Daemonic Yellow in with my Ushabti Bone. Next I'm going to paint all of his nails and his claws using Karak Stone. For all the spikes protruding from the troll's back, I'm going to go with Brainmatter Beige. The whole time I'm painting this miniature, I'm also keeping in mind that I'm going to be using Army Painter's Quick Shade at the end. So knowing that, I'm deliberately choosing colors that I think will go best with a dark brown shade. For the hair, I've decided to go with a dark brown, in this case Dryad Bark. The troll has several patches of skin that have been lifted away from its main body. I'm going to be painting all of these Deathworld Forest. Next I want to paint the shield and the bones that are hanging from the troll's belt. To reach these I'd have to paint at a really awkward angle, and you also wouldn't be able to see it on camera, so I've decided to remove this miniature from its base. Also, I was curious to see if this miniature could stand up without the support post under its right foot. I was pleasantly surprised to see that there's a hollow in the foot of the troll, and that there's a second support that extends up into the foot. After playing around with this miniature and testing its weight balance, I'm 99% sure it could stand up without the support post under its right foot. So if you're thinking about cutting that off, I'd say go right ahead. As long as none of your players are too rough with the miniature, it shouldn't have any problem staying in place. Now in order to avoid touching the miniature while I paint it, I'm just going to attach that support post to a cork. Next I'm going to paint the small skull hanging from his belt, and I'm going to be using a pure Screaming Skull for this. For the shield I'm going to be using Army Painter's Plate Mail Metal. And as you can see, I've stopped using the cork, and this is because my camera is unable to see what I'm doing with that cork in the way. And it's amazing how much your varnish actually protects the paint, because after I was done this, I had to retouch a lot of the areas of the miniature. For the decorative bones hanging from the shield, I'm going to be using a mix of Karak Stone and Screaming Skull. I'm painting each one a slightly different color, just to give a little bit of tone variation in the bones. For the troll's loincloth, I've decided to go with Doombull Brown. This troll has a tangle of ropes going around the shield and also around his waist. For this I'm going to be using Leather Brown. It's hard to notice, but there's also ropes that are holding the skull onto the belt. I'm painting these leather brown as well. If you decided not to cut off the support post, I'm going to show you something you can do to make it blend in better. At first I thought about making it look like the troll was kicking through a brick wall and then have that wall support his foot, but in the end I decided to keep the original support and make it look like it was blood that was stuck to his foot. So as you can see, the first thing I did was trim down the center of the post to make it look like it was narrowing in the center. Now I'm just using some super glue to put the troll back into his original position. Now if you know this is what you're going to do from the get-go, then obviously it's better to do this before you prime the miniature. Next I'm going to add some decorative skulls that are from a pack called Ristel's Extraordinary Market. And this is essentially just to give a source for all the blood that the troll is going to be stepping in. Next I'm going to be using some of the Games Workshop green stuff to make it look like the blood is actually being pulled off of the floor. I'm also going to use a bit of the green stuff to smooth the transition between the skulls and the base. Now that that's dry, I'm just going to add some primer to the green stuff in my skulls. Next I'm going to paint the support post and the green stuff just below it Mephiston Red. For the skull pile, I'm going to be using a 50-50 mix of Ceremite White and Screaming Skull. Next, I'm going to paint the base using the same technique I've used for all my other miniatures. First, I'm just starting off with a base of 2 parts Karak Stone and 1 part Steel Legion Drab. Once that's dried, I'm just going to create a pattern on the floor that I'm then going to trace with Skavenblight Dinge. So first I'm just using the Skavenblight Dinge to trace over the pattern that I've drawn with a pencil, and after that I'm just going to draw random flagstone patterns. Next, I'm just going to be coloring in all my stones. The large ones are going to be colored with Army Painter's Leather Brown. Now, just like in previous videos, I'm going to be using a combination of Brainmatter Beige and Zombie Skin to color in random stones. The final step before using the quick shade is just to paint around the rim of the base, and I'm going to be using Dryad Bark. So here's what our miniature looks like so far, and now it's ready for the quick shade. So this will be the last miniature I use quick shade on for a while for 2 reasons. First of all, this troll is the last of my undead miniatures, and second of all, my quick shade is starting to become really thick. So just like in the case with the Minotaur, this miniature is quite large, and I had to do it in several stages. As I believe I said in a previous video, you have about 6 minutes before the quick shade has become so thick and congealed that you can't remove it anymore. So all I'm doing here is covering as much of the miniature as I believe I can handle at one time with the quick shade, and then using my brush to remove all the excess. After giving the miniature 24 hours to dry, I'm then going to spray it with some matte varnish. And it may be hard to tell in this video, but the matte varnish does make a significant difference. So you could definitely stop painting your miniature at this point and just add a few blood effects. I'm just going to take mine a few steps further with a little bit of highlighting. So the first thing I'm going to do is just clean up the areas I want to highlight using a 2-to-1 mix of Deathworld Forest and Elysian Green. So at this point I'm painting most of the miniature's skin, but I'm avoiding all of the deep creases. Once that's done, I'm going to mix a little bit more Elysian Green into my mix and a little bit of extra water. Now I'm going to focus most of my paint on the tops of the curves of his body and on tops of the tumors growing on his back. I'm also using this mix on the top of the troll's snout, around the tops of his ears, and around his eye sockets. Now I'm going to paint all the same areas again, but this time I'm going to lighten up my mix to a 2-to-1 Elysian Green to Deathworld Forest. This time, of course, I'm going to be working on a smaller surface area, and I'm going to focus mostly on the very tops of all the curves. I'm I'm also picking out features that I want to stand out more, such as the bumps on his skin, his knuckles, and the veins in some of his arms. Lastly, I'm using a pure Elysian Green, and this time I'm just going to be painting around some of the facial features that I really want to stand out. Next, I'm going to be using Karak Stone, and I'm just going to be doing a heavy dry brush over all of his nails and claws. The troll has a lot of grooves in his nails, and I'm just trying to avoid those as I paint. For all of the spikes, I'm going to be using a very thinned down Brainmatter Beige. For most of the spikes I repainted the entire thing, but because my paint's so thin you can still see the shade through it. Each time I add a new layer of paint to the spike, I make it smaller and closer to the top where the light's going to be hitting it. For the shield, I'm going to be using Army Painter's Shining Silver, and with this I'm just going to be picking out the edges of the shield and the rivets that are on the front of it. For the loincloth, I'm going to start with a reapplication of our original color, Doombull Brown. Once that's done, I'm then going to mix in an equal amount of XV88. I'm using this mix on all of the upturned surfaces of his loincloth and just trying to avoid the deep folds. And finally, I'm going to add a lot more XV88 to my mix and a little bit more water. I'm just going to add this in multiple thin layers to just brighten up the most upturned edges on the loincloth. For the hair, I'm just going to be doing a heavy dry brush using Army Painter's Dirt Spatter. For the eyes, I'm first going to touch up the original color, Mephiston Red. Next, I'm going to give the eye a bit of a glow by mixing in an equal amount of Wild Rider Red. And I'm just using this to put a small point in the center of the eye. For the troll's tongue, I'm going to go back to my original color, which was 3 parts tanned flesh and 1 part Dryad Bark. This is the final highlight I'm going to be doing for this miniature, and once I'm finished, I'm going to spray the whole thing again with a matte varnish. Once our varnish has had time to dry, it's time to add the blood effects. I'm going to be using Citadel's Blood for the Blood God. And what I'm trying to do here is give the appearance that the troll has just stepped on a large puddle of blood and is stuck to his foot. The last thing I'm going to do for this miniature is add a layer of Ardcoat to the inside of his mouth and his tongue. So here's our finished product. I hope you enjoyed this video and found some of it useful. Thank you very much for watching.